to haul all of the heavy bags back up the stairwell, out of the window and down the ladder, but eventually all 4 of them made it back to the abandoned office building where Leo's car was idling. They calmly loaded their bags inside and set off on foot towards Leo's apartment while he inconspicuously pulled away. And that was it. The team of thieves had pulled off the perfect heist. No one would even know the vault had been compromised until someone paid it a visit on Monday morning, by which time they'd all be back in Italy. Leo and his old friend Speedy left Antwerp later that afternoon, heading south on the E19, a motorway that connects Antwerp with Brussels. They were tired but excited. Neither man had slept in 2 days, but the heist had gone without a hitch. The other guys were already on their way back to Italy with the haul, leaving Leo and Speedy with the simple task of burning all the evidence. The marked banknotes, invoices and deeds that had been inside the locked boxes, as well as anything else that might connect them to the robbery. Leo wanted to burn it in a warehouse in France, but Speedy was very nervous and wanted rid of it as quickly as possible. After some heavy persuasion, Leo eventually pulled off the motorway and onto a narrow dirt road that led to some dense woodland out of view of the passing cars back on the E19. Leo jumped out to look for a spot where they could burn all of it, and found the perfect place close to a footpath lined with tall trees. But when he got back to the car to collect it, Speedy was in the middle of a full-blown nervous breakdown. In a blind panic, he'd completely emptied the bag of evidence all around the woodland. The mud around the car glittered with tiny diamonds, and the wind had taken hold of banknotes and paper receipts which it scattered in bushes and undergrowth all around them. Leo was livid. It was he who had convinced the others to include Speedy in the plans after all. But now it would take too long to clear everything up. They stomped the visible specks of diamonds beneath the mud as best they could and got back in the car. No one would find that stuff out there anyway. The following morning, a local hunter, August van Camp, who owned the land, stumbled upon the mess. He couldn't believe it. Teenagers had been on his land again and left all this litter behind. He called the local police to report the trespass. They'd heard it all before. He'd had previous disputes about youngsters on his property. They idly noted down his grumblings until he mentioned some envelopes they'd left. Envelopes that had the Antwerp Diamond Centre address on them. A swarm of police arrived in minutes and began to gather up the evidence. Before long, the extensive pile of rubbish was on a table back at the Diamond Squad headquarters. They found all sorts in there, most of it circumstantial. But it turned out that during the prep, one of the men had become a little bit peckish, and he'd decided to purchase a nice salami sandwich. The half-eaten sandwich was amongst the pile, but so was the receipt. The Diamond Squad paid a visit to the shop that it was purchased from. They matched the timestamp on the receipt with the store's CCTV footage, and there was a tall, muscular Italian man buying the sandwich. Using DNA left on it, they were able to identify him as Ferdinando Finotto. Police believe him to be the man also known as the Monster. But this wasn't all they found. There was an invoice for a low-light video system paid for by Leonardo Notarbartolo himself. There was also a business card with the name and address of one Elio Dionorio, an Italian electronics expert already known to police. He is the man they believe goes by the name The Genius. Police also managed to find SIM cards linked to the men, and they used cell tower evidence from pings that happened during the robbery to connect Leo's phone with a man by the name of Pietro Tavano, a nervous man and long-term friend of Leo, who is firmly believed to be Speedy. By this time, Leo was back home with his family in Turin, unaware of the progress authorities had been making, but he'd have to go back to Antwerp. Firstly, his rental car was due back there that week, and secondly, he was concerned that he'd been at the Diamond Centre so often that if he suddenly disappeared, he'd be earmarked as a potential suspect. So the following morning, he and his wife jumped into his rented Peugeot and set off north and through the Swiss Alps towards Belgium. But they weren't even halfway there when police surrounded his home back in Italy. His son refused to let them in, but they had enough evidence to grant them a warrant, and so they forced their way inside. Within his safe, they found 17 polished diamonds, with certificates that connected them back to the vault. They had their man, but he was nowhere to be seen. and a man with his capabilities and connections could be anywhere by now. Little did they know he was racing right back to the scene of the crime. Leo cheerily waved at the Diamond Centre's security guard, whom he told he was stopping by to collect some mail. The guard acted casually, but he was aware that this was the man they were looking for, and so he contacted the detectives the moment Leo was inside. Police surrounded him in minutes. They bundled him into a police car and forced him to direct them to his apartment. When they arrived, Leo's wife was stepping out of the building with a rug rolled up beneath her arm. A minute later and they'd have missed her. The rug was later vacuumed and specks of diamonds were found. She too was taken into custody. Leonardo Notarbartolo was found guilty of orchestrating the heist. The Belgian courts came down hard on him, and he was handed a 10-year sentence by the Court of Appeal of Antwerp in 2005. It might sound light given the magnitude of the theft, but since it wasn't an armed robbery and nobody was hurt, the sentence size was limited. He was eventually released on parole in 2009 after serving 6 of those years. But one of the conditions of the parole was that he was required to compensate the financial victims of the heist, which he made no attempt to do. So in 2011, a European arrest warrant was issued, and he was eventually caught again that year at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris during a layover from the United States to Turin. As a result, he was made to serve the remainder of his sentence until he was released in 2017. But what about the others? Well, as a result of the sandwich evidence, Belgian police persuaded French authorities to raid the home of Ferdinando Finotto's girlfriend, who lived on the French Riviera, and where they found marked $100 bills that connected them to the Diamond Centre. Eventually, Finotto was arrested in Italy in November of 2007, where he was handed a 5-year sentence for his role in the heist. D'Onorio denied all involvement in the crime, but he did admit that he'd installed security cameras in Leo's Diamond Centre office. But saliva found on some of the gaffer tape in the vault provided DNA that matched with him, and he was eventually extradited to Belgium in November 2007, where he too was given a 5-year sentence. The cell tower evidence was enough to charge Pietro Tavano for his part, and he was also given 5 years. But what of the King of Keys? Well, Leo and his men refused to implicate one another. Police knew of a 5th man due to cell tower records and DNA evidence, but the King of Keys is the only man who has to date never been apprehended for his part in the heist. His identity is as yet unknown. During the initial 6 years of Leo's incarceration, he denied any involvement in the heist and refused to speak with any journalists. That is until he spoke to Wired in a tell-all story. In the interview, he claimed that a wealthy diamond dealer paid him to do it all. He also claimed that he didn't actually get his hands on the estimated $100 million worth of loot that was recorded as missing. According to him, the majority of the leather diamond pouches were empty, and he and his men ended up with around $20 million worth of goods. He alleged that he'd been the pawn in an enormous insurance scam, and that the diamond dealer had removed all his gems from the vault prior to the heist. That way he could claim them back on insurance and keep his diamonds. But officials have serious doubts about this. The heist itself exposed flaws in the vault's security, meaning there'd be very little in the way of insurance money anyway. But who knows? Either he was used as part of a scam, or the thieves did actually steal 100 million big ones, and it's a yarn he spun in order to cloud the true existence of his wealth, which was stashed out there somewhere. Like I said, 3/4 of diamond deals were made off record anyway, so most of it's totally untraceable.